Hello everybody, CVH here, and today I'm bringing you a quick deck tech on none other than Rothgar Forge Crusader. So this is a deck that I heavily recommend if you guys are looking for something fresh and exciting to take to the ladder. Crusader, at the exact moment of the time I'm recording this video, if we're strictly talking about the best, most competitive decks on the ladder, Crusader isn't normally mentioned as being among them. It is suffering from a bit of underplay at the moment, and there are some reasons for that I'm not really going to get into here, but this was a suggestion from a few people in my Twitch chat in a relatively recent stream. They wanted me to play some Rothgar Forge Crusader, based around other than this card, Rothgar Forge itself, the 7 Magicka support in strength, ongoing, and the first time you summon a creature each turn, equip it with a random item. So Rothgar Forge Archer has been a deck in the past that people have played to some success. It's been featured in the Between the Lanes meta snapshot a couple times. Crusader is another one of those classes that can make use of the card, and this is just my take on how I did it. So if you guys are looking for, a sort of a, not really anti-meta, but something away from the norm, away from the current sorcerers and control decks that you might see on the ladder, this is definitely the deck for you. So what it's going to be making, what it's going to be trying to do is making great use of Rothgar Forge. That's generally the game plan. While Crusader is typically viewed as a more aggressive class, with such strategies as aggro and token Crusader. This deck does make use of a lot of the same token generators that token aggro Crusader might. However, it does play a more control-oriented game, as I'm sure you can probably already tell from some of the cards I included. So that's definitely something that might catch you off guard, or catch your opponents off guard if they see you in the Crusader class, and might mulligan for a very anti-aggressive start, but you might just be playing the control game against them, and that'll work out in your favor a lot of the time. So yeah, this is a deck that's going to be trying to play the defensive game, as most control decks do, against more aggressive decks. But if you're up against a slower deck, you'll probably try to eventually move into giant threats, hopefully with the help of Rothgar Forge, and start trying to mid-range your opponents out of the game, so to speak, because this deck, while it is a slower control deck, cannot really compete in the late game against a lot of those Blood Magic Lords, Mirrocks, stuff like that a lot of these other more dedicated control decks will be playing. And if you can't stick a Rothgar Forge in those matchups, you might be a bit out of luck. So without further ado, let's do as usual and go up the curve and talk about some of the interesting card choices, some of the more interesting ones particularly. But first off, we have some things that you'd probably consider staple for a control Crusader strategy, or something like it. 3 Executes, definitely an important card, one of the best removal options in Willpower. Even more so due to the relevance of Daggerfall Mage. I feel like I've said that in a lot of recent videos, but it bears repeating, simply because of how often Daggerfall Mage is encountered on the ladder. Rapid Shot, now this can very easily take care of Greystone Ravagers and a bunch of easy targets in aggro decks, and it also serves as one of the only ways Crusader has to cycle. If you're, just looking through your deck, you need to find those Rothgar Forges. This isn't the only way to do so in the deck, but this is an ability to help you trade up. You deal that 1 extra damage to something you need to deal it to, drawing a card in the same time, or just using it as a very cost-effective removal for one of those very cheap creatures, such as Greystone Ravager, or your opponent's Ravenous Hunger, but I don't think your opponent's probably going to be playing Ravenous Hunger. It's a pretty unique card to the deck. Rumor Profiteer. So Solid Body early in the game trades with a lot of things that they're going to be playing. Basically, that's why we play the early game. This deck it's not like Control Mage, where you can just sit back and then sort of camp and wait until your opponent builds a board, take care of it in one fell swoop with an Ice Storm. This deck is going to have to fight for the board early by actually playing things to the board the majority of the time. Rumor Profiteer is one of those good things to play early, and in the late game it can be very annoying if you're just healing out of range consistently. You can protect this by any number of guards in the deck, and your aggro opponent's going to have a very hard time breaking through when you have that consistent heal going. It also works very well with the token generators, which are already in the deck to use with Rothgar Forge. So yeah, very good inclusion in the deck. Ravenous Hunger, now this is definitely less of a solid creature as far as stats go, because it's taken care of by a lot of things that Bruma is not, such as the Rapid Shot, but it does pose quite the threat to your aggro opponent. You could maybe consider, this may be one of the flex spots that you might consider changing out if you're not facing a ton of straight up aggro decks. This Aggro Battle Mage, for example, does have some easy answers to this, but this is a card that I included because at the time I was playing this deck a week or so ago, I was encountering a good amount of aggro decks. Rift Thane, just one of the better creatures that you could possibly play. I heard some questions from my Twitch chat, especially why was I playing this if the deck is supposed to be slow, because you see Rift Thane in a lot of Crusader aggro decks as well. And I think the answer really is that Rift Thane is just incredibly valuable. It's either a 4-2 for 2, which can help you when you're trying to get aggressive against those slower decks, or it is a 2-4 for 2 with Guard, and that's actually pretty insane. Your aggro opponent is likely to get the jump on you at the very start of the game. You have some early game heal, but they're likely to hit the first attack to your face. So if you can then drop down a 2-4 Guard for 2, following that up with like a ring into a Hive Defender or something, you're going to be in a very great position for the rest of the game moving forward. Morkel Gatekeeper, much the same sort of card. It's basically seen in all the aggro decks that run Strength, as is Rift Thane and all the aggro decks that run Crusader, but the fact that it is a guard, the fact that it can help you trade up against other things, and the fact that it is a prophecy, especially something this deck is not necessarily the heaviest on. As you can see, 9 prophecies in the deck makes it a worthwhile inclusion. It can buff up those tokens well when you're trying to just sort of finally burst your opponent down at the end of the game. So 2 raiding parties, it could easily be 3 in this deck. I was only playing with 2 myself. While this deck does want to make use of the token generators for Rothgar Forge, Rothgar Forge can only be used once per turn, so you don't always need the token generators. They're just one way to make sure you have something in your hand that can attack immediately, since we're obviously not playing the Nord Firebrands themselves. Raiding Party also has additional uses as a pretty good board clear early in the game against aggro. It's probably not going to do much to help you clear against a slower deck, but you won't really need to. More than likely, Raiding Party on turn 3 can act as Crushing Blow against aggro. It can space out its Nords and hit 2 1-health creatures. Pretty versatile card. Cloud Rest Illusionist, another one of those prophecies in the deck, and it is basically there to help you trade and to pair with Execute to take care of a lot of different things. Takes care of Manacora, takes care of Markarth Bannerman, basically anything with 6 or less. It's just going to reduce the attack, combo with Execute, take care of it like that. It also helps you dealing with things with lethal, Fighter's Guild Recruit. Very high utility card here, and the fact that it also has a pretty reasonable body, so you're not even too sad to see it just off of a Prophecy Raw a lot of the time. If your opponent's attacking you, that indicates an aggressive strategy. A 4-3 Prophecy that can start trading more than likely favorably with things is very valuable. We all remember what happened when Moonlight Werebat was a 4-3 Prophecy, and this is basically the same thing without trades, so a little less exciting, but it is going to take all those favorable trades that we all remember so well that Werebat used to take. Dawnbreaker, another way to buff our things to take favorable trades. Just a very important thing for this deck to be able to do. Control Spellsword, also quite the popular deck recently, and we can't always rely on getting our Dawnbreaker off Rothgar Forge, so this is a pretty easy way to take care of Night Shadows or Blood Magic Lords or something like that. Earthbone Spinner, don't really need to talk about it too much. I mentioned this in my card analysis video on Shadowfen Priest, which is probably, by the way, kind of ironic that I mentioned that because Shadowfen Priest gives this deck quite the headache, but Earthbone Spinner, one of the best silences in the game, very good against a wide variety of decks currently in the game, including Gardener of Swords. Hive Defender, one of the best cards I could possibly think of on turn 4. Great guard for this deck, exactly what it wants to be doing. I guess we can mention Tier 2 since it's here. If we needed one more Prophecy, if you feel that you really want to tech that hard against aggro, Tier is fine, but Hive Defender is probably just a better card. So Daguerreoth Mystic we can touch on a little bit. This is a card you would not have found in any decks about a month or 2 ago, because it recently got buffed to be a 4-5 instead of a 4-4, so no longer does it get one-shotted by Lightning Bolt. It's a little bit harder to kill in that regard. I've actually played this when I've played this deck on the ladder a little bit. Daguerreoth Mystic actually sticks more often than you'd think. It's pretty hard to get rid of at the moment, and it will just search out these Rothgar Forges for you. And since that is the centerpiece of the deck, Daguerreoth Mystic seemed like a good inclusion for me. It's probably not 100% necessary. Maybe if you test the deck more and you find cards you absolutely need to fit in, it might not be 100% needed inclusion, because eventually you're going to draw those Rothgar Forges if you're stalling the game enough anyway, or you can win the game by other means. But Daguerreoth seemed like a fun inclusion, and it did work out for me pretty well, so I definitely encourage you to test it if you've previously written the card off. Perhaps the 4-5 body will surprise you. So Markarth Bannerman kind of central to the strategy, as it is central to most strategies that want to make use of tokens, such as Merrick Battlemage. Now this card is fragile, it will die to Lightning Bolt, but the upside is just so huge if it's able to stick. Those Nords can help you trade, they can take care of little things, they can just stick in your hand, you can save them, save 2 to 4 Nords, and eventually when you play Rothgar Forge, you know that you're going to have those 4 turns of free items, and that's really how you can start running your opponent with all the value you're generating, just run them right out of the game. So yeah, very good against control decks especially that might not have an answer to it, such as Ramp Scout. I mention this every time I mention the card, I think, even though Ramp Scout's not particularly played too much on the ladder at the moment. Piercing Javelin, don't need to talk about this card at all. Fantastic removal for the deck. Pillaging Tribune, Don't really need to talk about this one either. One of the best options for life gain, which we definitely do need in the deck since we are playing the slower strategy, and things get buffed to pretty huge extents thanks to the Rothgar Forge, especially if you can get double Rothgar Forge on board. Then all of a sudden you have these 10 to 15 attack creatures. One Pillaging Tribune with that is basically the same as playing an Odoving and Pillaging Tribune. So yeah, Pillaging Tribune definitely should be in a deck like this where you're playing a slow control-oriented strategy with a bunch of big threats. Immolating Blast, a 1-of tech, helps you against aggro if you can draw it early enough, and they're basically committing to the shadow lane or committing to one lane that you're not in. If you've guarded one lane, they're probably going to try to race you in the other lane. They dump everything to one lane. Immolating Blast can help you clear. It can also help against some of those more complex control board states if you're in the control mirror match. Again, this could be a flex spot. It is pretty good against those strategies, though, so I do recommend testing it. It is the only 1-of in the deck outside of Dawnbreaker, which again you can only play 1-of. So it's more of a tech choice than anything. I wouldn't say it's 100% necessary. You could try Dawn's Wrath over it, but Dawn's Wrath felt a little bit too slow against those aggro decks. Yeah, you just needed something to play a little bit early for those. Rothgar Forge, centerpiece of the deck. I already talked about this a bit. The idea is we're going to stall our opponents, get the board on their side pretty much clear, and then develop a Forge when we have the time to play the 7 Magicka support card that might not do anything in the start. If we have a 0-cost Nord that can take advantage of it immediately, that's fantastic, and if not, we're just going to reap the benefits of this for turns on end after the fact, and hopefully our opponent's just not going to be able to answer threat after threat after threat, or answer one single support card, which is a problem. Shadowfen Priest, like I mentioned, is definitely a problem, and probably the main reason you won't see this deck appear on any Tier 1 lists anytime soon. But boy, is it fun when it gets going. Alright, so Vigilant Giant. Now this is actually another flex spot. I was originally playing a different Giant, Belligerent Giant instead. This is more of the spot removal option if you want to get more aggressive. Vigilant Giant's definitely a more defensive option. Helps you cycle. This is another one of those ways that we actually have to start draw cards in our deck. So it can be another threat against control decks. And I think it might be a little bit more versatile in this deck because it also can be your wall against aggro. If you're finally stabilizing, you just need to drop this one giant guard they won't be able to get by. Having sort of a critical mass of guards in this deck makes the board state pretty common when you have a guard in each lane. They're both fairly large, so it'll be pretty hard for your aggro opponent to break through in either lane, and then all you have to do at that point is just wait until you draw one of your ways to heal, then eventually just start killing your opponent whenever you feel inclined to. It's no real rush at that point. They might just concede. But Belligerent Giant could be good if more supports come into play that you really need to deal with. For example, if this deck were somehow to make it to Tier 1, and you saw Rothgar Forges everywhere, you might need a way to deal with those, but at the moment, Vigilant Giant seems perfectly fine. And Manacora, 3-of, another card that I don't need to touch on much. If you're playing a control strategy, this card is just an amazing removal, functions as a removal and guard at the exact same time. Not much can be said about Manacora that hasn't already been said, fits in the deck perfectly. Any guard that you can play in this deck that has an added value is just fantastic because you're playing that defensive game, plus the Rothgar Forge will allow your guards to be even larger than normal, so your aggro opponents are really going to have to just be forced to have either cast out or a silence to deal with most of them. We are not, however, playing anything later than Manacor. No Mirax, no Odoving. We can't really compete in the late game against a lot of these control decks anyway, so I didn't feel like it was warranted to include that many threats. If we are going to compete in those control decks, with those control decks in the late game, it's going to be with the Rothgar Forges, which turn all of our other early to mid game creatures into threats. So basically, we're putting all of our eggs in the Forge basket with this deck. That's kind of the point of it. If they remove the Forge, we're going to have a bad time, but if you don't get the Forge removed, you're going to be able to basically dump threat after threat as long as you hold back on some of your Rift Thanes against other control decks, which should be easy to do. You're not pressured to play them. Just hold back on them, you get the Forge online, and they all become 5/5 plus. I mean, unless you roll nothing but Maple Shields and Imperial Armors and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the deck. I definitely encourage you, if you're looking for something a little different, a little more fun, and if you really like playing, huge items on your creatures for free every turn, this is probably the deck for you, especially if you want a different take on Crusader particularly. Unfortunately, it is kind of regrettable to note that it is seeming to be more of an expensive deck. It might not have the most legendaries in it, but it does have a few, and they are pretty necessary, I would say. Maybe not Dawnbreaker so much. I don't know. Maybe the legendaries aren't really the problem so much as the epics. When you look at this, all the cards that are not premium are either epic or legendary, and that's kind of a ton. There are some flex spots, like I mentioned, but no ways to make this deck super, super cheap. But if you have the soul gems or the time to grind, or you just have all the cards already, such as in a lot of us have been playing this game for multiple months, and you're just looking for something else to play, sort of exhausted the options that you feel are super viable, this is definitely a fun option. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Hopefully you've enjoyed the sort of analysis on the card choices. If you have, feel free to leave a comment, feel free to like, feel free to hit subscribe for more strategy content. content, more deck techs coming up, more stream highlights coming up, more gameplay videos coming up, etc. As always, leave a comment below with what you think you'd like to see in the channel. Stay tuned to my Twitch page. Be sure to leave a follow on the stream if you haven't. I'll link that below as well. And I will see you guys next time.